next guests are veterans of Iraq and Afghanistan, and they're continuing to serve their country at home and abroad. Please welcome Eric Greitens.
And I ended up as a 20-year-old kid living and working in 2 different refugee camps with unaccompanied kids. And talk about hardship. That was a real lesson and insight into what real tragedy looks like.
Now, Eric, you are a former Rhodes Scholar, Navy SEAL, writer, photographer, and the CEO of Mission Continues. You're author of The Heart and the Fist, The Education of a Humanitarian, The Making of a Navy SEAL, which is a New York Times bestseller.
We did it, guys! We did it! We did it! We did it! We did it! We did it!
I felt like I had seen a lot of hell in my life. I'd worked in Bosnia, I'd worked in Rwanda, I'd worked in Cambodia, and one of the homes of a deaf student dying. I'd been in Albania. I'd done all these things. And then I was a SEAL. I was in Iraq and Afghanistan and Southeast Asia and the Horn of Africa. I'd seen all of these things, all of this difficulty. And I'd worked with literally thousands of veterans who'd been through hardship. And I never anticipated the viciousness and the awfulness of what would be done to me in politics.
Now, in a statement tonight, the governor said, quote, "I did not commit a crime."
The governor was embroiled in multiple scandals, but what led to today's resignation?
Eric Greitens is a Republican politician, the former governor of Missouri. Now, Greitens is in fact a disgraced former governor. Facing impeachment, he resigned from office in 2018 after serving fewer than 2 years as governor.
You'll remember Greitens resigned the governor's office in 2018 during a scandal involving an affair and accusations about blackmail. He denies all of those allegations as well. He says they're all part of this effort that he says is being driven by political rivals in Washington, D.C., trying to end that Senate run, John.
I came to office to fight for the people of Missouri. The last few months have been incredibly difficult. I am not perfect, but I have not broken any laws nor committed any offense worthy of this treatment. I will let the fairness of this process be judged by history. The time has come, though, to tend to those who have been wounded.
Prosecutors are dropping an invasion of privacy charge against Missouri Governor Eric Greitens.
This afternoon, the Missouri Ethics Commission, or MEC, released this 18-page report about its investigation clearing former Governor Eric Greitens.
Former Missouri Governor Eric Greitens went on Kansas City radio this morning to say that a recent government report had indeed exonerated him of any wrongdoing.
William Tisby pleaded guilty to evidence tampering this week in former Governor Eric Greitens' legal case.
And we know she is no stranger to controversy. We now know that she's facing calls from the Missouri governor, as I just mentioned, the AG. They want her to resign.
Breaking news out of St. Louis. Circuit Attorney Kim Gardner has announced she is resigning from office.
Greitens went on to say that he feels vindicated.
Now that truth has come out and you've been exonerated, what does that look like for you? Is your political career now, is it done?
I think I was actually given a great gift. Like, I really know how evil works. Not intellectually, not in my head. Like, I understand it in my bones. I see all of the moves. I know exactly how the system works. I know how it is designed to keep people sick. It is designed to make people weak. Are you going to veer off to despair? Or are you going to take this pain, take this hardship, take this suffering, and use it to make yourself and your life better? And that is what's fundamentally at the root of resilience. Resilience is the ability to deal with hard things and actually become better as a result of it. The gift in pain and despair and hardship is that sometimes it can tear you away from who you've been so that you can become who you're supposed to be. That's the beautiful gift in it.
Viewing these things as gifts or opportunities for growth, because failure, as you point out in your book, failure is essential. But failure is not just a thing that happens to us, it's a thing that has to happen to us. Yes. The Patina'd podcast is about the earned wisdom bound in pain. It's about chasing failure, catching it, and using that as an opportunity. It's about scar tissue and sinew. It's about stretch marks and dented fenders and refusing to hide them. It's about pushing our insecurities and shame to the forefront instead of behind us. Instead of seeing rust as something that compromises a structure's integrity, we choose to see it as the grit that builds character. This is the Patina'd podcast. All right, so welcome to another episode of the Patina'd podcast. I have a guest here today that I'm very excited to talk about. I can give some of the backstory here as we're going in terms of how, Eric, I became aware of you. But first, let me kind of go through this little tiny intro. I've talked to amazing guests, but I've never talked to a guest where like the intro is, at some point I got to cut this short and abbreviate it because like, dude, the things that you've done in life is incredible. It's admirable. So I'm going to start with college as a Rhodes Scholar to get into Oxford. I've always heard the term, by the way, he's a Rhodes Scholar. And I'm like, I don't know what that means. And so I had to actually look up to see what that means. So yeah, you're a Rhodes Scholar. You're a humanitarian who's done work in Cambodia, Bolivia, Croatia, Rwanda, Zaire. I'm probably missing some places, and encapsulating that in big chunks, but I'm sure there were multiple places within those countries that you were doing work. You're also decorated Navy SEAL. I'm a combat veteran. And so just being an infantryman, you always kind of look up to the Navy SEALs as like, that's the guys, right? And so being not just a Navy SEAL, but a decorated Navy SEAL and one who attained high ranking within the Navy SEALs, that's amazing. So earning the Bronze Star, Purple Heart, while serving 4 tours in military service, just amazing service. And then also just to kind of add some other stuff to your repertoire, a New York Times best-selling author. You've had 7 publications, or at least in books that I could see. I've read one, and that's the one that kind of got me connected to you, which is the book called Resilience. And for my money, like there are really good books out there on resilience. And like I said, when I first reached out to you, Eric, the study of resilience for me really started about 17 years ago when I first got sober, but really honed in about 10 years ago when I began to mix in physical exercise along with the mental health side of things. And then even more recently, in the last 2+ years, when I started mixing in doing impossible things physically, doing things that I never thought would be imaginable. Like I'm not being a runner and then going and doing a marathon with 0 training, right? Like, yeah. And then having my idea of resilience just completely shattered and obliterated. And that just kind of changed the game for me. So I'm still on this journey, and I'll always be for the rest of my life of kind of evolving in that area. And your book points to that, the importance of sustainability in these areas and how to continue to grow. Like I just mentioned, there's other books out there. There's more recently, The Comfort Crisis, which I really liked. David Goggins, both of his books were really good and helpful pieces of work in terms of resilience. Cameron Haynes recently had a book called Endure. That was a good book too. So like really good books out there on it. But sir, I mean, like the Resilience is the book for me. That's the standard. And it's named Resilience, it's like just the most appropriate name possible. So yeah, that's my intro for you. And that's a short version because it would take us an hour and a half just to kind of go through your whole intro. So,
well, Kenny, I just want to say, man, I appreciate you. I appreciate being on with you. Thank you for your service, man. And thank you also for what you're doing here on the podcast, right? Thank you for helping to get these messages out and spread messages about resilience. Thank you for sharing your own story, right? Thank you for sharing your own journey. Because one of the things that I found working with a lot of my fellow veterans is that one of the things that's so hard for them is that they feel alone. Mm-hmm. And they feel like other people haven't had to walk this path. And when they know that other people have struggled in the way that they're struggling, when they know that other people have seen a light at the end of the tunnel, when other people have been real with them also about how hard it's been to get out, to deal with an addiction, to deal with a physical injury, to deal with post-traumatic stress disorder, but they see that their fellow brothers have done that, it makes a tremendous difference. So I'm honored to be on with you, man, and really appreciate what you do.
Yeah, it's an honor for me. The honor is all mine. I like to kind of go into some of the origin story of somebody.
Sure.
There always seems to be a rising from the ashes component. Oftentimes, more often than not, it's trauma and then coming out on the other end. And oftentimes that relates to childhood. It doesn't necessarily have to be trauma, but I'm still searching for the person that was born with the perfect upbringing. And because of that perfect upbringing, they're highly resilient. I haven't found that person yet. I don't know. So you want to tell me a little bit about your background, Eric?
Yeah, man. Well, first of all, I'll tell you, I'm extraordinarily blessed and was extraordinarily blessed as a child. And I'll say one of the things I think is important about resilience is that we have the opportunity to see the blessings around us, even when things are hard, even when things are challenging, that can be a way through. And I appreciate your question and your perspective, because it helps everybody see, everybody got handed a bag of apples and they weren't all perfect. Okay. That's true. That's true for everybody. It's also the case that sometimes I think in the society, we can focus overly much on the things that were the challenge, and we end up losing the strength around it. Now, I'll come to some of the challenges in a moment, but I think in terms of just a big strategic perspective, I'll talk about how I use that perspective both in humanitarian work and then later working with veterans. So for me, I was blessed. When you think about all of the billions of human beings who've been born on this planet, who've been born in the United States of America with two parents who I knew every day for whatever their imperfections were, I did know that I was loved. And I went to very good schools, just public schools, elementary, junior high school, and had some wonderful teachers. I do think that I was born and had a innate sense that I had a duty, probably especially for my mom, to protect and help to make things right for her. And I think that, and I can even almost in retrospect, almost sort of see that from the moment I came into the world. And I think that led to a tremendous desire to push myself, to achieve, to try and create a sense of rightness in the world. And it also led to the idea that, and I think this is a true idea, that you can, in a world where there is hardship and pain and suffering, you can be a force for good. And so that kind of helped to shape my whole mentality. I remember as a kid, I used to read a lot of those choose your own adventure books. And I also remember as a kid being at the public library and feeling like I must have been born at the wrong time. Because I went back and I read about the Spartans at Thermopylae, or the Greeks at the Battle of Marathon, or even the guys at D-Day. And I thought, like, well, what are we doing here? Right? I'm a kid in suburban Missouri hanging out at the public library. Where are the great adventures? Where are the great challenges? And I've come to believe that I was born at exactly the right time, and that this is a time of tremendous challenge, both in our country and in the world, and that we have a big mission before us. But certainly as a kid, that was also a struggle. It's like, what's my place here? Right? You read about all of these heroes from before, and I was struggling at the time to figure out, well, what does it really mean to be heroic today? And that's obviously what led me to some of the humanitarian work and the Navy SEAL stuff and some of the other work that I did with my fellow veterans.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because that mentality, like I had that same thought, and I'm sure we're not the only ones. I actually thought I was supposed to be born probably in the 30s or 40s because I was, oddly enough, like Elvis Presley was my hero for a while as a kid, like a weird hero to have, but I was a big Elvis Presley guy. But yeah, I think also there's this intrinsic call to adventure, I think. And I don't think it's only within males. I think because I've worked with females that have a very similar thing too.
Mm-hmm.
It might even look a little bit different, but anyway, yeah, there's like this call to adventure, and then that leads somebody in today's narrative or context to be like, well, what does that look like? Is it a firefighter? Is it a soldier? Is it a police officer? What does that look like for me?
Right.
And a lot of people will have these kind of ambitions. Like there's doctors too and different sort of things, but there always seems to be like this tag to service with it, which is unique. And we can kind of talk about later on, but there's this like something that happens along the way. And more recently, because I do work with teenagers in my practice from time to time, and this extreme avoidance to challenging things that somehow gets embedded, but not just embedded, but accepted culturally and pushed and encouraged. And so by the time they get to the place to where they're old enough to take on said adventure, it's like, no, I'm not going to be a fireman. I'm not like, I'm going to start a YouTube channel, or I'm going to do that. I'm going to do these things, So yeah, it's interesting. So what is it for you that got you to say, okay, I have this desire, but I'm actually going to follow through with it. I'm going to go do the humanitarian aid, and I'm going to go take on these things.
I just wanted to take a quick pause and genuinely thank you for getting this far through the episode. This podcast is very small if you haven't noticed, so every like, every comment, every follow or subscribe, it really makes a difference. So my only request from you is to interact with the content if you like it. Like and follow, rate and review, and share if you feel like this is something that's worthy of sharing. Thank you so much.
Yeah, so when I went to college, I had never been outside of the country before. Canada, no Mexico, nothing. As a kid, like I think made it to Hannibal, Missouri once, and also went to Cleveland where my aunt lived, right? So not a lot of foreign adventure, but when I was a freshman in college, they had a program where if you had never been abroad, you could apply for a grant to go overseas to study. Now, this is actually, it's a very long story, so I'll give you the 20-second version. We can turn it into a longer one if you're interested. But I ended up going to China in 1993. Now, when people think about China today, they think of the kind of growing, booming economy. I went to China in 1993. This was just a couple years after Tiananmen Square. It was a time when people were still riding bicycles all over Beijing. And the short version of a long story is that I ended up getting arrested in China for teaching about the Constitution. Now, that was a huge wake-up call for a kid from Missouri, but I came home from that and was certainly interested in exploring more of the world. And after my sophomore year, I had a professor who was going to work with refugee children who were survivors of the ethnic cleansing in Bosnia. And specifically, these were unaccompanied children. So unaccompanied is a word that's used in the international community to talk about kids who were orphaned or who might have been separated from their parents during the war and were living alone. So I went to work with Bosnian refugees, and I ended up as a 20-year-old kid living and working in 2 different refugee camps with unaccompanied kids and some of the other caretakers who were there. And talk about hardship, right? That was a real lesson and insight into what real tragedy looks like. I mean, you're talking about families where almost every single person in the refugee camp had obviously lost their homes. Many of them had lost family members. They'd seen husbands, brothers, sisters, wives, cousins, children murdered. They're living in a refugee camp, and they have no idea when this situation is ever going to change. And many of them have been stuck there for years. And one of the lessons, Kenny, that I actually saw in the refugee camps, which was really interesting, was that I saw that a lot of times the people who I thought were struggling the most were the young people who were about my age. They were kind of older teenagers, young adults, because their whole life had been cut short. And they're here in this refugee camp. There's all of this tremendous tragedy, and there are no jobs. There's no prospects for education for the future. All of these things have been cut off for them. And they really were struggling. The people who I saw who were doing the best in the refugee camps were often the parents and the grandparents who had really young kids. Mm-hmm. And the reason was because they knew that they had to wake up every day and be strong for somebody else. And it was a lesson I would later take and apply to the work that I did with returning veterans. But one of the big lessons is that the most damaging thing, I think, for a man, for a human being, is to live without a sense of purpose. Purposelessness is the real issue. And that can manifest itself in all sorts of ways. It can manifest itself in addiction. It can manifest itself in self-loathing. It can manifest itself in despair. It can manifest itself in anger. But that's the real issue, is purposelessness. Mm-hmm. And when people have a purpose, then they can find a way through. And there's that great phrase that he who has the right why can make it through anyhow. And that was one of the big lessons for me in the refugee camp. So to your question, like, how did I get into that? I had that experience in China. Said, all right, I want to learn a lot more about the world and how this works and how I can be of service. And then after that work with the Bosnian refugees, I continued to do that the next summer with Rwandan refugees. And then, as you said, went on to work with street children in Bolivia and one of Mother Teresa's homes for destitute and dying, et cetera, and continued to see all of these lessons about how people can live through real hardship.
Yeah, that's amazing. So an arrest helped get you there. It's interesting that it was the Constitution that the Constitution was also the thing that got you arrested. It makes sense for the country there, but why was it the Constitution at the time where you felt like, okay, I need to make these people know? Like, what was it?
So what happened was, again, it was a longer story, but I gave you the short version. The longer story was that I was working in the city called Changchun, China, which was kind of like China's Detroit at the time. So big industrial center. And it's also a long story, but I ended up losing all my money. And this is back in the day. There are no ATMs anywhere. Okay, you traveled with traveler's checks. So I ended up showing up back in Beijing and I had no money. And I got off the train and a friend of my uncle's who was picking me up in Beijing picks me up, and I told her, look, I don't have any money. This is what happened to me in Changchun. So she got me a job at a Chinese company where what I would do during the day was they had documents that had been translated into English by someone who was a native Chinese speaker. And they asked me to just go through and clean them up. But then, more importantly, they asked me to teach an English class in the afternoon. Now, again, this was 1993. And a lot of the students who came to the class were in their early 20s. So they had been activists at Tiananmen Square in 1989. And so they had seen what had happened there, and your listeners may know it was a really violent repression of student activists who were protesting for democracy in 1989. And they had never talked with a foreigner about their experience. And there were these ideas about like freedom of speech, freedom of the press, freedom of assembly that they wanted to talk about. And because I was not a good English teacher, I just had a free discussion during the class. And these were the questions that people were asking. And that's what I ended up talking about, which all led to a Friday night. I think it was 8 o'clock at night. I'm playing darts in a workers' dormitory with a couple of Chinese friends, and two police officers showed up and told me that they were taking me to the station to fill out paperwork.
You must have thought, this is a joke, right? Like, who's pranking me right now? Like, this is crazy. It's interesting. All right. So at what point did you end up transitioning over into the military?
Yeah, so it was pretty much, I was doing that work pretty much straight up until I went into the military. So I ended up, after college was when I did the Rhodes Scholarship, and I went to Oxford, and I was there for 4 years. And I did a PhD studying how international humanitarian organizations work with children in war zones. So I went back for the dissertation and looked at the history, but then I also went and looked at the actual practice of how this was working in practice. And basically once I finished the dissertation, then I went to officer candidate school.
Okay, very cool. And so from officer candidate school directly into Buds?
Yeah. Okay. I went there from OCS in Pensacola, Florida, and drove out to San Diego, Coronado, California, and went to Buds.
And during your time in the service, like I said, Bronze Star, Purple Heart, a bunch of other decorations. And how did you earn the Purple Heart? What happened there?
Yeah, so I was, and my last active duty deployment was to Iraq in 06, 07. And I was serving as a commander of an Al-Qaeda targeting cell. I was in Fallujah, and the short story is one morning my team was hit by a suicide truck bomb. And they blew up a suicide truck bomb outside of our barracks. It's part of a complex attack. Complex, as you know, your listeners might, means that there were mortars, small arms fire, suicide truck bombs, all kind of came in and hit us at the barracks that morning. What they were also doing at the time was they were loading the suicide car bombs and truck bombs with chlorine. So the intention was not only to kill people with the explosion, but also to create this kind of poison chlorine cloud when the explosion went off. So that's how the Purple Heart came to be.
Okay. Yeah, that is nasty, evil stuff. Like beyond the bomb, to add chlorine to it. Didn't we? I think we had some in the country. We had some chlorine train crash incident that wreaked havoc amongst a whole town from that one, if I remember right. But yeah, that's nasty.
Yeah, I mean, it's old school World War I chemical gas attacks is what they were doing at the time.
So that gets you to when you left Iraq. Is that when you started up the nonprofit and started working with veterans and that sort of thing?
Yeah. So the brief story there is that when I came home, I went to Bethesda to the Naval Hospital to visit with some recently returned wounded. They actually had not just sailors and Marines there. They had some airmen and some soldiers as well. And you go through the hospital, and as you know, you ask those men and women, what do you want to do when you recover? And every single one of them says to you, I want to return to my unit. Mm-hmm. But the harsh reality was that a lot of them were not going to be able to return to their unit. So some pretty severe injuries. One guy had been kind of shot through the neck. One guy had lost an arm, just pretty severe injuries. And they weren't going to be able to return to their unit. And the unfortunate thing that I saw, Kenny, was that from a place of great charity and kindness, what was happening was that the country was now looking at these wounded veterans as charity cases. And the entire structure of aid was designed to give them things, right? So you think about what happens psychologically. Like one day, you are a United States Marine Corps sergeant. You're in Afghanistan. You've got the flag of the United States on your uniform. You've got a mission. You've got a team. You've got a purpose, and you are moving. And then you wake up, you're in the hospital, and all of a sudden people are asking you if you want a free gift basket, if you want a blanket, if you want a free trip, if you want free tickets. And all of these men and women look down like, oh my God, like, is this how the world sees me now? They see me like a charity case. Mm-hmm. And to go back to, the lesson that I had seen in the refugee camps was that people need a sense of purpose. And the basic idea behind the Mission Continues was I donated my combat pay, had a friend put in some money from his disability checks, and we used that to start an organization to help returning wounded and disabled veterans continue to serve. That's why it was called the Mission Continues. And we put them to work at Habitat for Humanity, at Big Brothers Big Sisters, at a Boys and Girls Club. And what happened was, as they continued to serve again in the world, they realized that they were still needed. And if you're still needed, then you'll literally get up off of the couch.
Yes.
If you're still needed, then you might decide to stop stop drinking. You might decide to put those pills down. You might decide that also, wow, I still have a lot to offer. I want to go back to school. Wow, I've got a lot to offer. I think I could open my own business. So once we got people moving in the right direction of purpose through service, that was the foundation around which we could help them put those other pieces of their life into a new whole.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Yeah, that would have been helpful for me. My path was like I went to the VA, was given a bunch of medication, and sleeping medication, and then medication, I guess, for PTSD, and that was essentially it for about 3 or 4 years until I wound up there because of my addiction and at a meeting and pointing at a guy who later on became my mentor, Leif Carlson, and saying, I'm going to die in 6 months in a sure fall. And he worked there at the VA and he took that personally and got me help. But yeah, there was nothing, right? In fact, for the first 6 months when I got out, it felt not only aimless, but it felt almost like there was like this depersonalization that was going on. Like part of me feels like I'm not supposed to be here because I should be dead. And then part of me feels like I think I'm on vacation right now. Like I should just do anything I want and whatever I want and just like party.
Yeah. And what happened to you happened to literally, hundreds of thousands of veterans. Like they came back and they were handed drugs. And that's not the answer. It's not the answer. And what it also reinforces is the idea, number one, that there's something permanently wrong with you.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Here. So there's something permanently wrong with you, Kenny. Here's some drugs, and you're going to take these, in theory, forever.
Yep.
Right? A, that's not helpful. B, the idea that there's a solution in the drugs and that's not in you makes people think, well, I mean, maybe there's also a solution in that bottle of whiskey. And maybe there's a solution in cocaine. And maybe there's a solution somewhere else. And so the process gets exactly backwards is that the answer for everyone when they're going through hardship is in themselves. And you can build a team. That's what we did at the Mission Continues. You can build a team. You can build a sense of brotherhood. You can build a sense of community. You can build a sense of friendship around people. But the big message has to be, you may be going through tremendous pain, hardship, anger, despair, all of that. That's perfectly understandable. And the answer is within you. You have the ability to come out of this. And not only that, not only do you have the ability to come out of it, you have the ability, if you choose, to make that pain a source of wisdom. You have the ability, if you choose, to turn that suffering into a strength. You have the ability, if you choose, to take all of that fear and build courage on the other side. Yeah. That is fundamentally what resilience is about.
That's a perfect segue into, let's get into resilience. And so I know there's a physiological definition of resilience, which is essentially elasticity to bounce back, that sort of thing, which within that realm, that's an interesting way of looking at resilience, like within the physiological or the medical way of it. Like my skin is resilient right now, it's bouncing right back. I guess, how would you define resilience? Like, let's give a good working definition of resilience, and then we'll start talking about it.
For sure. Well, first, let's talk about where that definition comes from, what you were just talking about, because it's really important, because it can be very misleading and also really hard for people. So that definition of resilience that you're talking about, of kind of bouncing back, it has its roots it's an idea rooted in physics of elasticity, meaning the ability of an object to return to its prior state after being hit by an outside force. And that can be, as you demonstrated, that you pull up on your skin and then it goes back to the way it was. The reason why that is such a often misleading definition when you're dealing with pain, hardship, despair, etc., is that there's no going back. Okay, if you tell somebody resilience is bouncing back, like the 20-year-old kid who's a Marine who went to Afghanistan, who came home without one arm, he knows he's never bouncing back.
Mm-hmm.
He's never going to be the 20-year-old Marine who went to Afghanistan again. That past is gone. And there are a number of philosophers who I quote in Resilience. I mean, one of them, I don't actually think I quoted him in Resilience, but is a Greek philosopher named Heraclitus who talks about the one constant in life is change. You are always changing, always. And so why does that matter? It means that when you think again about the physics of it, you're moving. So when pain hits you, it hits a moving target. So the issue is what's going to happen now? And that's where your heart comes in. That's where your choice comes in. Are you going to veer off to despair? Or are you going to take this pain, take this hardship, take this suffering, and use it to make yourself and your life better? And that is what's fundamentally at the root of resilience. Resilience is the ability to deal with hard things and actually become better as a result of it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I like that definition of it. Yeah. For me, and within that physics term of it, of bouncing back, there's an impossibility there. But like, furthermore, I don't want there to be. I don't want to be 21-year-old Kenny.
Right.
Like, no, right. Thank you. Like, I'm not only better emotionally, developmentally, I'm also better physically. And my ability to deal with life is far better. I don't want to be that guy anymore.
Right.
You know? Okay. So you mentioned in the book Resilience, you mentioned this idea of the separation between those who are resilient and those who are not is how they deal at life's ends when they come to the broken places in life.
Yeah.
Or the challenging points in life. And those who are resilient, when they come to those broken places in life, they use that for earned wisdom. They use that to become better. So from a practicality standpoint, those who are listening or watching, how does one start to build resilience? How does one even begin? They're like, okay, great. I want to be a resilient person, but I've been trying to do that for 10 years. How do I even start?
Yeah. So the answer is yes. The answer is yes, start. That's how. And it sounds so simple, but the answer is in action. It doesn't have to be big. It doesn't have to be overwhelming. It doesn't have to be something that you do that fundamentally changes, your whole life in one day. It's not how life works. But you can make a decision today that you're going to do something better than you did yesterday. And that might be deciding that when you wake up, you're going to do 20 push-ups. Cool. That's a victory. Notch it. Boom. Done. Mm-hmm. I did something I didn't feel like doing, and I felt better afterwards. Great. I'm going to make a decision today that I'm actually going to read for 5 minutes. I'm going to read something healthy. I'm going to read something positive. I'm going to read it for 5 minutes. Boom. Victory. Done. I'm going to make a decision today that I'm going to reach out to somebody who had a positive impact in my life, and I'm just going to send them a short text message. Hey, man, I was thinking about you today. I remember when you did X for me, you did Y for me, and I'm really grateful for it. Bang. Boom. That's another victory. Mm-hmm. And you chalk them up, one after the other. And what you find is that, and again, I talk about a lot of the Greek philosophers, they recognize this. Then you build the habit of resilience. You figure out how to do things that are hard. And the reason why this is so difficult today is that today the culture is exactly backwards. It is exactly backwards. Today what happens is that if you're having a hard time, the first thing people do is they come to you and they say, hey, how you feeling? How you doing, Kenny? How you feeling? Well, guess what? If things are horrible, you're going to feel horrible how you're feeling. And then the idea is that because of they ask you how you feel, then the idea is, well, you're going to take action based on how you feel. Or we're going to give you a pill because of how you feel. Well, what happens is those actions then become your identity. The things that you do over and over again, that becomes who you are. The Greeks thought of this exactly the opposite direction. The question was not how do you feel? The question is, who are you? I'm a soldier. Cool. All right, you're a soldier? Boom. Well, then what do soldiers do? Soldiers serve others. Soldiers are courageous. Okay, cool. How are we going to do that today? Well, I'm going to do something that's hard. I'm going to do something for somebody else. And then what happens is you take those positive actions, and then guess what? You feel differently. So the culture that we're living in today makes it actually exceptionally hard for a lot of people to build this habit that I was just talking about. It's easy to say, yes, you start. That's how you start. You just do positive things. You start taking actions, and those actions build on top of each other. But we have to recognize one of the reasons it's hard to do and harder to do in our culture is that the big push is to ask people how they feel. And then if somebody says, well, I feel depressed, I feel sick, I feel in despair, I feel this. It's fine and good for someone who you love to acknowledge those feelings and let them know that they're heard, they're understood. But if you really love them, you don't want them to stay there. And what happens in today's world is that we give people excuses. If you love somebody, if you really care about them, you're going to give them a challenge.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah, I love that reverse engineering that's happening. So the protocol is identity, action, feeling.
Yes,
right? And
exactly,
and
brother.
being very intentional about it. You can't run that protocol without intentionality. Running the protocol, because it goes against what is natural and what is taught in culture to do, you have to be intentional. So just doing the protocol in of itself creates high intentionality.
100%. It creates a great intention. And then what it also does, it creates this really positive feedback loop. Okay? Mm-hmm. Who are you? I'm a soldier. I'm a Marine. I'm a dad. I'm a brother. I'm an author. I'm a therapist. Whatever it is. Okay, cool. That's who you are. What do you do? What do you do? And then once you start doing those things, then it's actually easier to think of yourself that way again.
Yep.
What happens a lot of times in pain, in despair, and hardship, one of the most devilish tricks of pain and despair and hardship is to tear you away from who you really are. The gift in pain and despair and hardship is that sometimes it can tear you away from who you've been so that you can become who you're supposed to be. That's the beautiful gift in it.
You and I are such on the same page with this, viewing these things as gift. It's actually, there's biblical precedence to that too.
Yes.
But yeah, viewing these things as gifts or opportunities for growth, because failure, as you point out in your book, failure is essential. But failure is not just a thing that happens to us. It's a thing that has to happen to us.
Yes.
Yeah.
I love how you put that. If you're going to grow, you're going to fail. It is a natural part of the process of growth. And everybody recognizes that, like the kid who's learning how to walk, in the history of Homo sapiens, we have no records of any infants who stood up and ran. Hasn't happened. You stand up and you crawl and then you fall and all of these things happen.
Kim Jong-un, though, I think, by the way, he might have, just to cut you off, he might have been able to pull that off.
Thank
I don't
you.
know. But,
Thank you. That's true. That's true. If you read North Korean propaganda, we may have just one other counterexample. Okay.
Yeah.
But the point is that we recognize that's true for kids. If you're going to learn how to spell, you're going to misspell words. You're going to learn how to read. You're going to read imperfectly, all these basic things. And yet somehow when we become adults, people forget or just don't wish that we're part of the process anymore, but it is. Mm-hmm. And it's part of every process. And becoming comfortable with the idea of discomfort, becoming comfortable with the idea of falling short is actually essential, not just to growth in terms of your skills, but it's essential to growth in terms of who you're going to become.
Let's talk about segmenting. I know you tell a story about how you were taught segmenting, but I want to go over in practicality, what does segmenting look like and how does it help with resilience?
Yeah, so I'll tell one quick story about the hardest moment in Hell Week, and then I'll use that as a way to kind of talk about the practice of segmenting for all of your listeners. So as everybody knows, BUD/S has a reputation for being the hardest military training in the world. The hardest week of BUD/S is a week called Hell Week. It is a week of continuous military training during which the average class sleeps for a total of 2.5 to 3 hours over the course of the entire week. In BUD/S training, in my class, for example, BUD/S class 237, we started with over 220 people in the original class. And by the time we graduated, we were down to 21 originals from that class. And the people who come to the training are, they're Division I college wrestlers and football players and high school track stars and swimmers. Like, it's not a shoddy group that shows up in the beginning, right?
It's not basic training.
Right.
It's people that have already proven themselves.
Incredibly difficult training. And I remember what was for our class, what was the hardest moment of the hardest week of the hardest military training in the world. And that moment came at the beginning of the second night of Hell Week. So what happens is they kind of wake you up and there's all of these artillery simulators and blanks being fired, and they wake you up and they run you into this place called the grinder, and they've got hoses in your face and you're doing hundreds of push-ups and jumping jacks, and they send you out into the ocean, and then you're rolling around in the sand and you're running with boats on your heads and you're carrying logs and doing the obstacle course and swimming and all this stuff, and you're training constantly. So such that by the time you get to the beginning of the second night, you are completely spent. You have now been training for, usually by that point, it's about 24 hours straight, no sleep. And the exhaustion that you feel, I often explain to people, it's not like being tired in the workout after a gym. This is a different level of spiritual exhaustion. And what they did at the beginning of the second night was they took the class out and they lined us up on the beach to watch as the sun was setting. And as the sun was setting, they came out and they got on their bullhorns and they started talking to the class. And your listeners may know from movies and things like that, that if you want to quit SEAL team training, if you want to quit BUD/S, there's a bell that they carry around. You walk over to that bell, you ring it 3 times, and it means that you've quit. So they've got the class at the beginning of the second night lined up on the beach watching as the sun is going down, and they come out on their bullhorns and they start saying, "Say goodnight to the sun, gentlemen. It's going to be a very long night." Everybody's watching the sun go down. Like, that's right. It's only the beginning of the second night. And you've got a very long week ahead of you. So everybody's remembering now. They're baking it into your mind like, you guys are completely spent. And you haven't even started. This week has hardly even started. And you're absolutely trash. You've got an entire week to go. How can you possibly make it through the week? Well, one person ran for the bell and you could hear it going off ding, and then another ding, and then more and more. And we had more people quit our class at that moment than quit at any other time in all of the SEAL team training. And I often say to people, so who would have thought that the hardest moment of the hardest week of the hardest military training in the world would come when all you actually had to do was to stand on the beach and watch the sunset? But that's all we had to do at that moment. That's all we had to do at that moment. And one of my great mentors, a guy named Master Chief Will Giles, who I talk about a lot in the book, he talked about when you're going through Hell Week, you just make it from meal to meal. You make it from breakfast to lunch, from lunch to dinner. You don't think about an entire day. You certainly don't think about an entire week. You break things down so that you can do the thing that is right in front of you. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that is always hard for people is when they think about the enormity of the task in front of them. And that task can be an emotional task. How am I going to get this relationship right? It can be a personal development task. How am I going to get myself right and strong? It can be a purpose-related task. How am I going to start to get on my mission? How am I going to discover my mission? How am I going to make a difference? How am I going to make money? All of these different things are overwhelming when you think about them in their totality. And what the process of segmenting does is it allows you to break things down until you get to the thing that is right in front of you that you have to do. And sometimes that thing can be as simple as taking one clear, relaxed breath. What do I have to do on this beach right now? That's it. Maybe smile, make a joke. The guys who are next to me, right? That's all I actually have to do right now in this very moment. And that's where all of my power is. So you segment and segment and segment until you get to the place of now so that you can do what you need to do. I need to open my computer. I need to send one email. I need to pick up my phone. I need to make one phone call. I need to stand up out of my chair and do 20 push-ups. Whatever the one thing is, you figure out what it is and then you do it. And that's the beauty of segmenting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I use the same concept, and thanks for narrowing that down. Because I think it's a beautiful concept. It works. I see it work with clients on a regular basis. Okay, you don't have enough in you to fill out a job application. Okay, can you get out of bed for an hour? Let's make it an hour today. You can't do it for an hour straight. Can you make it for two half an hour segments? One this morning and one in the afternoon. Can you do that? Can you start with that, right? And it's just breaking it down to the next achievable thing. And ultra running, it's like making it to the next aid station. It's like,
Right.
man,
Right.
I'm 55 miles deep. I'm like,
right.
There's no way I can do another 50 miles or another 45 miles. Maybe I can make it 6 more miles to the next aid station. So yeah, I think it's a wonderful concept that I know works. I know it works.
Yeah.
So yeah. And then there's another concept, and I think this is closely related because we talk about what you're talking about. The thing that's causing them to ring the bell here is anticipatory anxiety, or what we call in the 12-step world, we call future tripping, right? Like you're thinking about this anxiety that's out in front of you. I used to do this as a kid, being the younger brother, the youngest of 4 boys. When the parents would be home, I would have the safety of the parents. But when the parents would leave to work, it was coming. Whatever I did to antagonize my 3 older brothers while my parents were there, it was going to come to me when they left. And so it was almost not worth it because I would be thinking for 15 hours or so, or 12 hours, this is coming to me now.
Yeah.
I'm laying in bed at night, man, when the parents go to work in the morning, what's gonna happen to me? It's gonna be brutal.
Right.
And the anxiety that I would feel, the anticipation that I would feel was way worse than the actual beatdown that did come. The beatdown came,
Right.
But it was the anticipation was way worse. So
Right.
it's this idea of future tripping, right? So I think closely related to that, within the same idea, what you mentioned in your book, this Greek philosophy of premeditation of evils too, right? And this almost like preparing yourself for that thing that you fear to happen. I think that's important because within vision work, we talk about envision the win, envision what it's going to feel like, envision, this thing. And I think that's important. It has a place, But recent research is pretty clear. Envisioning the failure actually works better in terms of getting a thing done.
Yeah, and there's a couple of things to kind of pull apart there. So with the idea of premeditation of evils is that you positively think ahead to the tough situation that you're going to face. And then you imagine what you're going to do when you're in that situation. You imagine exactly how it's going to feel. So that when it comes, it's not the first time you've dealt with it. And it can be a very simple thing. So let's say, for example, like, because a lot of listeners may be experiencing themselves, or they may not realize how difficult it is. You just mentioned, Kenny, sometimes for people to literally get out of bed. Mm-hmm. When you're able to do it, it feels like you can't believe that somebody couldn't do that. Mm-hmm. But when people are in a state of, severe depression, difficulty, despair, anxiety, like that can be a real challenge for them. So it can be something as simple as that, where you positively, when I say positively, I should say proactively imagine, okay, the alarm's going to go off. I'm going to feel exhausted. If the habits stay the same, what's probably going to happen is that my mind's immediately going to be flooded with negative thoughts about myself and fear about the day. If the pattern remains the same, what's probably going to happen is that I'm going to think to myself, maybe there's a reason, maybe I need more sleep, so I'm just going to hit snooze, right? Mm-hmm. Whatever the pattern is for somebody, you go through and say, like, this is what I've done every day. But instead, tomorrow, when this happens, I'm going to recognize it, I'm going to see it, and I'm going to action. This is the positive vision thing. I'm going to envision myself saying, yeah, we'll see what happens today, but you know what? I'm going to win this first minute of my day. Mm-hmm. I'm going to get out of bed, and not only am I going to get out of bed, I'm going to drop down, I'm going to do 5 push-ups, and I'm going to know that today is different. And you can think about that, and again, it sounds so simple for people who don't have this challenge, but for people who do, who are in a place of tremendous despair, you can spend some real time thinking, this is how I'm going to win the first minute of my day. And once you've learned how to do that, then you can take that same process of premeditation of evils, like, okay, when this comes, this is how I'm going to deal with this situation, so that you're not ambushed by it. People do much better at things that they've done before. And so if you can practice doing something in your mind ahead of the actual event, it helps you to navigate it successfully.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's so interesting that this concept, is around thousands of years ago. And we now have research that's saying, hey, we know if you do these things, then it's going to help prepare your mind for the actual event. Even in terms of exercise and things, like people, they've done what would seem to be ridiculous research studies, like a waste of money research studies of having people think about exercising. And then when it came down to the exercise, their performance was better than their peers who didn't think about exercising.
There's a huge amount of research now that it matters. Like also this shows the power of the mind. And this should be helpful to your listeners if you're struggling. Your mind is a fire-breathing dragon of mythical, immense, tremendous power. And it is a beast when it turns on you. Mm-hmm. So use it to the good. If you're working out and you actually envision the muscles that are growing while you are exercising, you get more growth.
Yeah, I know. That's so weird.
There's a tremendous amount of power there because you're signaling to yourself, this is why we're doing this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, just incredible, the power of the mind. I'm gonna read a couple of quotes of yours, and then it's going to lead into a question. So, sorry, I have dyslexia. Our sense of ourselves shapes what we do. When you claim that identity, you're also claiming the commitment and the expectations and the values that go with it. and you're making a promise to live up to them. So that was one quote. So I'm going to leave you with that and then kind of combine that with another quote of yours. Resilient people can see their responsibility in hardship. And so that was a much shorter quote. So for sustaining resiliency, like for me, if I were to narrow down my job on this planet, whether it be as a husband, whether it be as a father, or whether it be as a clinician, that job is to model resiliency. That's the job I've taken on, right? And to model resiliency means there has to be sustainability with it. And it means that in order to have sustainability with it, and like it says in your quote there, there must be action or attention into continuing to grow in new areas and find different areas. So there's that, but also there's this thing of taking on responsibility for the failures. That's another part of resiliency for me, is as I'm modeling this, I'm not just putting up the Facebook or the Instagram highlight reel to people. I'm also allowing the people to see that I'm attempting to do things and I'm failing, and here's where I failed. Here's how I've messed up in my past. Here's responsibility in that. Here's there's all this sorts of stuff. So having said all that, in being a teacher of resiliency, does it force you to engage more in living in those ethics that you're teaching? For you, I would imagine being this guy, this teacher of resilience, puts a lot of pressure on you, not only to live under said standards, like this internal accountability system to live under said standards, but also having responsibility there for when you fail in your own standards.
Yeah. Yeah, I think, gosh, there's a couple pieces there. So let me take a couple different strands and tie them together for us. One is that the path to power and also the path to joy and the path to happiness, it's all paved in one stone, and that's responsibility. When you take responsibility, that is the path to power. And yes, it's responsibility for the things that you've done where you failed and you've been imperfect. But that also means that you also get to take responsibility for the tremendous achievements and the joy and the love and the beauty and the mission and the purpose that you've also created in your life. Mm-hmm. And a lot of times when people think about something like resilience, they think about just like the hardship and the pain and the difficulty. That is part of it, and it is necessary to understand. But we're not here on this planet, I believe, to just live in despair and pain and hardship. The idea is to deal with those things in such a way that you also create joy and you create happiness and you create achievement and you create love and you create beauty in the world. And that's only possible when someone takes responsibility. And I also think that even the word responsibility, sometimes when people hear it, they think just about like putting on a big backpack, right? I'm gonna load it up. I'm gonna load it up. And this is a classic, like soldiers, Marines, like, oh, I'm gonna load it more. I'm gonna put more and more responsibility in. The responsibility that you take actually enables you to grow as a man. The whole point of every initiation ritual that takes boys who become young men and young men who become men is that you become a man who's able to be of service and can take responsibility. So taking on responsibility for yourself and your mission and your work in the world, yes, it means that there's work to do, but it's also a tremendous gift. It's a tremendous opportunity. What do you want to do at the end of your life? Look around and have taken responsibility for nothing? Like, you want to look around and say, like, this is what I built. This is what I did. This is what I achieved. This is also, and including, this is the joy that I created. This is the happiness that I created. And even when the world came and tried to make things really hard and was really unfair and things were really difficult, look what I did. And I'm proud of that. That's the path that responsibility offers you, which is, again, why the sickness and degeneration in the culture is this idea that the nice thing to do for somebody is to give them or to validate their excuse.
Mm-hmm.
That's easy to do. It's simple. Oh, yeah, okay, well, you've got your excuses. If you really love somebody, and including Kenny, it's important, if you love yourself, you won't give yourself an excuse. If you really love yourself, you're going to give yourself a challenge.
Mm-hmm.
Because the challenge reflects the idea that I believe in you, or I believe, or if you're talking to yourself, that you believe in yourself. And being willing to challenge yourself is one of the most fundamental acts that you can do of real kindness and love for yourself, because it shows that you believe in yourself and you believe in your future.
Yeah. So tying that in now with, I don't even know how to segue into this, but what we were kind of talking about before hitting record. What does that look like for you now, kind of taking that truth, that core truth of taking responsibility and the good that has come through the growth and opportunity to take on challenging things and have challenging things, but also taking on responsibility in terms of like life that, like you, even as you mentioned, life is unfair. Life's coming at you in different angles, in different ways, in ways that is totally unfair to you, but also then owning the things that you've screwed up in. Right. And the things where you fell in, so right. How does that look like for you today?
Yeah, I mean, one of the fun things I'm doing is that I'm writing another book. So when it comes out, I'll be happy to share it with you and come back on. And that's always a good and powerful way to actually reflect, right? I'm writing this next book, and it gives you an opportunity to both look back at your own life and also at the people around you and the things that you've learned about yourself and about others. And so I have to, and I do, take responsibility for everything that I've done imperfectly in my life. And not just in the past, like every day. Like no one is going to live a perfect day. So every day that you go through life, you can think to yourself, Marcus Aurelius talks about this. You ask yourself at the end of the day, before you go to bed, what could I have done better today? And also, what were my victories today? What did I do well today? And you think about that before you go to bed. And what it ends up happening is that you're priming your mind so that the next day when you wake up, you're already seeing, hey, this is how I landed in that trap of missing my workout yesterday. And this is the success. And I'm excited to be able to think about some other successes tonight. So I'm gonna take this opportunity right here. So I think you have to do that for yourself on big matters and small matters. And again, if you do it on the small things, it becomes very easy to do it on the medium-sized things. And you do it on the medium-sized things, it becomes really easy to do it on the big things. But it is a habit. It is a way of being in the world. And again, one that's not necessarily practiced or taught in the culture today. So I don't know if that's a helpful reflection, but.
Yeah. So using these skills, using these, I don't know, these pillars, these tenets, these things that you've laid out in your book, how did these help you during the political situation that you were in 2018, and then all the stuff that came out afterwards? How was that there for you for support?
Yeah. I mean, again, we could go on all of these stories. Like there are many stories, and maybe we'll do some of them in more depth later, but I felt like I had seen a lot of hell in my life, right? I'd worked in Bosnia, I'd worked in Rwanda, I'd worked in Cambodia, and one of the homes of deaf student dying. I'd been in Albania. I'd done all these things. And then I was a SEAL. I was in Iraq and Afghanistan and Southeast Asia and the Horn of Africa. I had seen all of these things, all of this difficulty. And I'd worked with literally thousands of veterans who'd been through hardship. And I never anticipated the viciousness and the awfulness of what would be done to me in politics. And the very short story is I'd never been involved in politics before. I ran for governor of the state of Missouri and won. Now, nobody expected that I would, Kenny, because I was a complete outsider, didn't take any money from lobbyists, did not play any of the political games. And what ended up happening was that because I was completely opposed to the insider culture of stealing from people, which is what a lot of politics is, I ended all gifts from lobbyists. I banned people. I slammed shut the revolving door between lobbyists and the executive branch. I also ended a corrupt tax credit program, which was stealing about $150 million a year from the people of Missouri. They'd stolen, over the course of the last decade, they'd stolen about $760 million from people, and I completely zeroed out the program. All that's to say, it meant that the whole political structure was opposed to me. The people of Missouri love me, right? We're at the end of 2017, the most popular political figure in the state of Missouri because we were doing the right things. And you'll also remember Missouri was the home to the anti-police movement. It started with Michael Ferguson in 2015. That was before I was governor. When I became governor, we defeated Antifa when they came to Missouri. When I was the first governor to do it, and I demonstrated that you could defeat Antifa while protecting everyone's constitutional rights. I was exceptionally clear, like everybody has a constitutional right to protest. Everybody does. And we were going to protect those rights, and throwing a brick through a window is not free speech. You assault one of your fellow citizens or you assault a police officer, you're going to be arrested. It was really simple. And we put together a very good strategic, operational, and tactical plan, and we were able to do all that. All that's a long way of saying that we're extraordinarily effective for the people of Missouri and hated by the political establishment. So what ended up happening was that there was a George Soros-funded prosecutor in the city of St. Louis who made up a false case against me. She was later found guilty of having lied over 62 times to the judge, to the court. She ended up being admonished by the Missouri Supreme Court. She ended up being fined, and she ultimately had to resign. She hired a corrupt former FBI agent to make up a false case against me. He ended up being charged with 7 felonies for perjury and evidence tampering and pled guilty. And they paid people. We know of at least $120,000 in cash that they paid people to make false accusations against me.
Wow.
And when those people made the false accusations, when they ultimately had to go on the stand and testify, they said that they were remembering their accusations through a dream. Okay. This is the kind of nastiness that happens. And you can see me now. I hope that you see I am happy, I am joyous, I am positive. And I also don't want to give anyone the sense that this was an absolute hell. And Kenny, it lasted for years. I mean, everything that I just told you about the prosecutor being found guilty of 62 lies, of the FBI agent being charged with 7 felonies for perjury and evidence tampering, that didn't come out till years later. So there were years where there were all of these false accusations in the press, and you can still go out and read them today because the media won't print the truth. Now, some places will, and it's nice, but they'll print all of the lies. And ultimately, it was an incredibly hard time. And I'll tell you one quick story from it about how important friendship can be. I had written the book Resilience to a buddy of mine named Drew Sheets. We called him Walker in the book. A buddy of mine named Drew Sheets.
His real name is out now. Okay.
Yeah. And he was happy. He actually came out and said, "Hey, listen, I'm Walker. I'm Drew Sheets. This man saved my life, and I want everybody to know who he really is," which is really cool. So, but Sheets called me one day when I was going through this absolute hell, and I picked up the phone, and dude, he didn't say anything. He just said, "Yeah, man. Like, I get it. I know where you're at. I know what you're going through, and I'm here for you." And that was a really powerful and important phone call for me. And I'll tell you, one of the things that was hardest for me, Kenny, was that I'd literally written the book on resilience. And one of the things that happened to me, and that can happen to a lot of people, I'm happy to share this story, was like I was beating myself up. How come I haven't healed faster? How come I'm not back sooner? How come I haven't rediscovered my joy? How come I haven't done all these things? And the beating myself up because I wasn't healing faster actually, of course, just made it worse. The things that I recognize now that's also really important, and I would say to all of your listeners, is that there's a fine line that has to be walked. Some healing just takes time. And you cannot expect yourself, you wouldn't expect yourself to break your leg and go running the next day. You know that there is a natural process of healing that has to take place. And the same thing is true with emotional wounds, with despair, with lots of things that life will throw at you. There's a natural place to that. However, that's not an excuse for wallowing in it. Right? Your leg might be broken, but you also know, I got to get up every day. I got to get my blood moving. I can still exercise even if I can't use my leg. I'm going to find ways to do what is positive for yourself. So you both have to find ways to do what is positive for yourself, and also have the patience to recognize that sometimes some of that healing just takes time. And for me, I can tell you, I'm happy to say this now, and I'll tell you, Kenny, I certainly couldn't have said this 2 years ago. I don't even know if I could have said it fully a year and a half ago. I can tell you now with 100% certainty, 100% of the time that I think about the hell that I went through, I am now glad for it. I have now come to a place of more strength and wisdom and courage and real joy and beauty and love in my life than I ever had before. And had that not happened, I don't know that I would have been able to achieve this. Okay, but it is now 2024. So I share this with everybody who's listening right now. Like, it comes, you got to keep working on it. You got to stay focused. You got to believe. You must have faith. It is there for you. And it doesn't happen right away.
Thank you for sharing that. Now, I just listed at the beginning of the episode all these amazing credentials that you had worked hard for to attain. Yeah. And then the hope for any citizen is to have a public figure with those type of credentials, with that type of heart to serve, with that type of experience of military experience, combat experience, scholarly experience, the whole gamut of experience that you would want in somebody to show up as a political figure for you. Because you're like, how soon can we get this guy in the presidency seat? Because we need something helpful there for us. Like, how soon can we get this guy there? So I'd imagine you were probably at the beginning when you announced, hey, I'm going to start running for office, I'm going to be governor. I would imagine there were a lot of people, like, I'm in California, so I didn't know about it. But if I would have known about something like that, I would have been like, man, that gives me like this excitement toward the political landscape in the future, where somebody with great experience and obviously a deep desire to help other people that are in need of help, true, genuine need of help. That person wants to run for office. That person wants to be in the political sphere. Beautiful. Please come on in, because I'm tired of the criminals and the lying, the people that are talking through the teeth. And you can tell, man, that person is a lying thief. Like that. Right. I'm tired of seeing that person keep getting put up and put into positions. So what does that look like for you? Is your political career now, is it done? Like, do you have aspirations in the future? Now that truth has come out and you've been exonerated on things, like, what does that look like for you?
Look, I'm certainly going to continue to serve. I'm certainly going to continue to make a difference. I think that was part of my mission for being put here on on earth. I think that's part of what I'm here to do. And I'm going to continue to serve. I love it when guys like you have read the Resilience book and connect with me. Hopefully this next book will also, be positive in the same way. And there are lots of different ways to continue to serve. I would still absolutely consider doing something in politics again. Happy to consider that. And I can also approach it now from a place of tremendous strength, wisdom, and I think a lot more insight. I think I was actually given a great gift. Like, I really know how evil works, not intellectually, not in my head. Like, I understand it in my bones. I see all of the moves. I know exactly how the system works. I know how it is designed to keep people sick. It is designed to make people sick. It is designed to make people weak. It is designed to get people on prescription drugs. It is designed to give people chronic conditions. There is real evil in the world. And I feel fortunate that I actually have been given this tremendous education to see how it is working. And so, the exact path that I'll follow, I think one of the things that I've come to is that I have even more faith that the right opportunities and the right doors will open in the right ways. If I keep doing the right things every day, I believe that God's going to take care of that. And so that's what I'm going to continue to do. Beautiful.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Eric. I mean, like, the honor to be able to have someone like you on the podcast. Like I said, I didn't know anything about your background or history before I bought the book. I'm just a student of resilience. I saw a book called Resilience, so I clicked on it. And by the way, like I mentioned in this episode here, as I was kind of brutalizing one of your quotes while reading it, I'm dyslexic. Some days are worse than others. So having it on audiobook was such a benefit for me, a huge benefit for me. Cool. And then also, I love when audiobooks are read by the author, because you can feel like the words feel deeper than having an actor read it, And 100%. So I really enjoyed the book, being able to have you on here and just kind of pick your brain on some of this, because I guess there's neuro research that points to dopamine is induced in the brain when someone speaks something that you already know to be true. So your book, as I'm hearing it, I'm just like, dopamine, like, I don't need coffee today. Like, this is like, it's using maybe different language, but it's using brilliant points that I didn't know that existed 3,000 years ago. And then how you're tying in ancient wisdom, bring it in with new practical experienced wisdom that you have, and then tying it together is so beautifully put together. And so that's why I originally reached out to you. And so thank you so much for coming on such a tiny podcast like mine. And I'm just really honored to have you on.
Hey, Kenny, I admire what you're doing, brother. It's a pleasure to be on with you.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Patina'd podcast. There are other shows that emphasize resilience, but my intent is to normalize personal development through embracing challenge by interviewing the common man and woman, the person that you and I can relate to. If you are someone who wants to soak up the insights of normal people doing extraordinary things, please subscribe. If you know somebody who is overwhelmed by fear and complacency, please share this podcast with them. I'm your host, Kenny Hill, and I run a private practice near Sacramento, California called Recovery Hill. My website is in the description tab along with my social media links. The intro music was Two in the Back, performed by Sunday at Slim's on Blue Dot Sessions.